Okay, great. So welcome to the webinar. As I just said, today's topics are about emotional eating, stress eating, and self-compassion. I think this is going to take around about an hour, but we'll see kind of how we go. So we've done a little name and where you're from. So welcome to everybody. And I thought I'd start by just talking about what I'm going to be going through over the next kind of hour. So I'm just going to be talking about why we emotionally eat, first of all, and what emotional eating actually means. Also going to talk about positive and negative emotional eating. So hopefully changing a little bit of the perspective on that about what we mean by emotional eating. Stress and what I've nicknamed the cortisol cravings, and how that plays into how we eat, why we eat, the choices that we make. And then also using self-compassion and a self-compassionate approach. These are the few topics that everyone asked for when I did a little poll on my stories. So I've tried to kind of interweave them all together and create something that's hopefully really helpful. Okay, where's my last one? So I'm just gonna give you a bit of an idea about me. So I'm Isabel, nice to meet you. I'm a registered nutritional therapist and registered nutritionist. I'm also a qualified and ex-private chef. So I was a chef before I was a nutritionist. I absolutely love food, and it's my mission to ensure everybody else does too, essentially. I work with disordered eating and hormone health. And my background is working within diabetes prevention in the NHS, an eating disorder outpatient clinic, and I now run my own private practice. And I also have a few hormone health conditions. So I have PCOS and endometriosis, and these are a few things that I also help other women overcome as well. And then a little bit about ID Health. So Isabel Talks Health, or ID Health, is who we are, who I am. And these are the 5 pillars that the kind of business works on, or that the clinic is based on. And I just think it's important to highlight these, as it really demonstrates what it is we kind of believe and do. So the main things that we focus on are the mind-body connection. So reconnecting our kind of feeling mind, our physical body and our feeling body. Informed nutrition, so making decisions from both a feeling and an educated place. Self-compassion, unconditional permission, and value alignment. And then these are the values of the company too. So autonomy, freedom, integrity, abundance, education, and compassion. So every decision that we make is based around these fundamental core values. So jumping into our topics for today then, first of all, what is emotional eating? So I'd be really interested to know what you guys think emotional eating is. So if anyone has a couple of words or a sentence or a little definition as to what emotional eating means to them or is to them, there's no right or wrongs here. It's not a trick question. But if you just pop in the chat box, perhaps anything that you associate to emotional eating or what you think emotional eating is. And I'll just give you a minute there. So eating when you're actually not feeling hungry is one of the things that we've had in there. Yeah, absolutely. I would agree. There can be lots of that playing into emotional eating too. So what I have as a definition on here is emotional eating is the term that we give to eating driven by emotional triggers as opposed to internal hunger cues. So exactly as you said, eating for reasons other than hunger is essentially how we would describe emotional eating. And what does that actually look like? So in practice, this might look like receiving bad news and then turning to specific foods for comfort. So these are typically food favorites from childhood, or foods that we're actively limiting or avoiding in our diet at that time. These would typically be the foods that we would turn to because they're going to be the most comforting. But it could also look like using food as a way of suppressing our emotions or suppressing feeling. So going through a stressful event and then using food to suppress or numb our emotions. This can also apply to things like caffeine, alcohol, or sugar when they're used as a way to ignore, suppress, or numb. So I don't know if anyone can relate to any of those things. These are just a few examples. Obviously, emotional eating can look different to lots of different people. But this is essentially how it would look like in practice. And it kind of runs around a little bit of a cycle. So I'm going to take you through the emotional eating cycle and what the different points are across this. So something happens that creates an emotional response. So this could be a stressful event. This could be receiving bad news. This could be anything that has an emotional response, which can then trigger an emotional or overwhelming urge or response to eat to soothe that emotion. And that then leads to overeating, which can then create guilt, shame, and as though food is in control of you and your emotions. So these are the feelings that tend to be associated with overeating that occurs due to emotional triggers. And then because we're in a vulnerable position, this kind of leaves us open for this cycle to start again. And it can be really difficult to then get out of this cycle. This can look different for lots of different people, though, and we can have different responses to eating through our emotions. And there can also be the reality where our emotions or stress leads us to restrict. And this is where the cycle would look a little bit different. So again, we have our emotional trigger, we have our emotional response, but then there's an emotional urge to feel control, which can happen through restriction. So making lots of dietary changes, telling yourselves you can't have something, stopping eating completely as a response to a stressful event. This then leads to restriction to feel in control, which can then again lead to the same feelings of guilt and shame and like food is in control, and the cycle starts again. But there can also be this kind of other sub pathway where binge eating occurs. And this might happen, this might not happen. But essentially what I'm trying to demonstrate here is that emotional eating is different for everybody. It can look different in lots of different people because emotions are different for everyone. Feelings are different for everybody, and that's okay. The way that we work towards overcoming emotional eating is identifying what's happening for us and figuring out what we need. But there is this whole other section of emotional eating, which I think is really important to highlight in terms of separating food and feelings and how that would actually look. So food and feelings then, and this is where I'm kind of coming onto this idea of positive versus negative emotional eating. So negative emotional eating, we would typically describe as eating being driven by negative emotions, eating to avoid feelings, eating to soothe in the moment or for now, or eating to fill a void. And that might be what you think of when you think of emotional eating. So just type a yes in the chat box if that would probably be what you would think about when you think of emotional eating. Yeah, got a few yeses coming through. Yeah, so this is typically what we think of when we think of emotional eating. However, what's the opposite of emotional eating? Unemotional eating. What's that? What's unemotional eating? What does that look like? And can we actually separate food and feelings? Because we also have this side of positive emotional eating. And that would be when our eating is driven by positive emotions. So there's a good chance that you've been out for a celebratory dinner because of a birthday or a job promotion or an anniversary. It's likely that there's specific meals that you have that relate to your culture or your traditions or things that you associate with happy memories. It's likely that you eat to connect with people around you. So going out for food just to catch up with people or talk to people. It's likely that you've had cake at a birthday. There's all of these reasons that we eat because of positive emotional feelings. And actually, if we're going to try and eradicate eating for negative emotional reasons, then in that same vein, we'd have to eradicate eating for positive emotional reasons too, which is quite sad, because all of these things are really beneficial and they're a huge part of life. Food is so much more than just nutrients and just fuel. Whilst those are really important factors into why we eat, there's so much more playing into this. It's a huge part of our society, our culture, our tradition. And actually, do we want to remove that? Do we want to take away those positive associations as well? So then this begs the question, can we negatively emotional eat in a positive way? And I'm going to come back to this in a few slides time when I've talked about a couple of other things to hopefully make a bit more sense. But I'm hoping you're starting to see now that there's lots of complexities to this. There's lots of things playing into emotional eating and why we eat in the first place. But a good thing to differentiate is emotional hunger versus true hunger. So what's the difference between these two things? So emotional hunger typically comes on quite quickly or quite suddenly, whereas true hunger usually develops a bit more slowly and over time. Emotional hunger is usually a stronger mental sensation than physical, whereas true hunger would be more of a physical sensation than a mental one. Emotional hunger, we usually crave a specific food, or specific foods, but it's usually something specific that we want to satisfy that feeling. Whereas true hunger, it's likely that we're going to want a variety of different foods, a meal, a snack, whatever it is. It doesn't have to be something specific to satisfy us. We are just hungry for food. Emotional hunger potentially isn't responded to by fullness. Even if binge eating occurs, even if a large volume of food is eaten, we might not feel full afterwards. Whereas true hunger is typically responded to by by fullness and knowing that you've had enough to eat. Emotional hunger is also often followed by guilt or shame, whereas true hunger wouldn't be. So these are the differences between hunger driven by emotions and hunger driven by biological cues. And it's really okay if you're looking at those two things now and being like, I don't know the difference between those. I can't tell whether I feel emotional hunger or whether I feel true hunger. And this is because we've kind of been taught, or most of us would have likely been taught, to disconnect from our true hunger for a lot of our lives. So if you have a history of trying lots of different diets, or if you have followed other people's rules for a really long time, then one of the ways to kind of cope with this and manage this is to disconnect from your true hunger, from your biological hunger cues. So what I mean by that is, say you're following a diet plan, you're following someone else's dieting rules, a diet club, a meal plan, whatever it is, and you have your meal time for that time, whatever you've been told you can have. And then an hour later, you're hungry, your body tells you that you're hungry. You can't eat because you have to follow someone else's rules. You are being told what to do. Someone else is in charge of your body. And sitting with hunger is really uncomfortable because hunger isn't a feeling that we're supposed to ignore. That's why it's not a nice feeling when we feel so hungry, because it's quite literally your body's way of saying, sort this out. We need something. Help us. Don't stop ignoring us. We need this. So in order to push through that and ignore that, you have to work really hard to disconnect from the feeling. And this is why usually with dieting and things like that, it doesn't come down to willpower. it's not weakness. It's not that you don't want it hard enough or you're not trying hard enough. Our biological cues aren't supposed to be overridden. We're not supposed to ignore when we're hungry. We're not supposed to ignore when we're tired. We're not supposed to ignore when we're thirsty or when we need a wee. We're not supposed to ignore these things. That's why we have these biological cues. But hunger is one of the things that it's become very socially normalized for us to learn to ignore and to push through, which can then disconnect us from being able to feel what real hunger feels like, which is when emotional hunger can start to feel like real hunger. And that can make all of this really confusing. And I don't know if you relate to anything that I've just said, but hopefully if you're here, that means that you do. And hopefully you can now start to be a little bit easier on yourself if you are struggling to separate perhaps emotional hunger and true hunger. Just like with everything, we can get a little bit deeper into this as well and start to connect how stress plays into this as well. Because another time that it can be really difficult to tell whether we're truly hungry or whether we're emotionally hungry is when our anxiety is quite high or when our stress is quite high, because our body's signaling becomes a little bit disturbed. So would you say that you ever struggle with stress eating, or would you type a yes in the chat box if you feel that stress can impact how you eat, or why you eat, or the decisions that you make, or if you eat, or yeah, if you feel that stress is a bit of an issue within your food decisions or your diet, then just drop a little yes in the chat box to make sure everyone's still with me and I haven't confused everybody to tears. I've got a few yeses coming through. Right, yeah. So stress can be another big thing that plays into this. So stress and the cortisol cravings. So this is what I have nicknamed our little cortisol and what it's responsible for. So first of all, the stress response. So what is the stress response? I'm just going to take you through what's happening in our body when we enter the stress response. So we have two pathways to our central nervous system. We have the parasympathetic response and the sympathetic response. And these are quite commonly nicknamed fight or flight and rest and digest. So you may have heard these terms before, you may not have, that's absolutely fine. But it's fight or flight that is our stress response. This is our parasympathetic response. And if we think about what has typically caused human beings stress for most of our existence, it's usually been a threat to life. That's usually been what has caused us stress. Either something was threatening us or our family, and we needed to either fight to defend ourselves or we needed to run away. So these are the two things that stress usually required from us. The two responses that were usually needed for a stressful event were to be either to fight or to run. Nowadays, things are a little bit different. Usually stress comes along and we perhaps want to run away from our desks, but we can't because we have work to do. And stress looks a bit different now, but our bodies haven't evolved further away from how stress used to be. Society has hugely advanced in much, much bigger steps than what evolution has. So our stress response is still very much the same, even though our stressful events have changed. So what happens when we enter the stress response is that, first of all, our body releases cortisol. So cortisol is our stress hormone. And cortisol gets released and it kind of travels around the body as like an indicator of, hello, we're stressed. There's something happening at the moment. Just so you're all aware, we're stressed. Something's gone on. And that's what cortisol does. So cortisol becomes higher and lets us know that we're stressed. But again, cortisol is a hormone. So our hormones are always playing into this stuff. So our body reads that increased cortisol level and identifies that, okay, we're in the stress response. That means we either need to run away or we need to fight. Either way, we are going to need some glucose. Yeah, hopefully that makes sense. We're going to need some glucose because glucose is our main form of energy, our preferred source of energy. So send some glucose into the bloodstream because we need to run or we need to fight. And that's actually a really helpful mechanism of the body because it's giving us the best opportunity it can to save ourselves and to defend our families and everyone around us. And at this point as well, our blood flow is primarily sent towards things like our muscles, our lungs, our heart, so that we have everything that we need so that we can have the best chance at survival. And this often isn't actually what we need when we are stressed at the moment. Stress in 2022 probably looks a lot more like we are quite still. We might be sat at our desks working, or we might be in the car in traffic. There are definitely still times that we're stressed and we do need this stress response in the way that it's intended, but stress looks really, really different now, which can be really, really confusing for our body. Because stress can also increase ghrelin. So ghrelin is our hunger hormone. So again, all of these things are driven by hormones, which is why our endocrine system is so interesting. So we have two main hormones involved in our hunger and our fullness, ghrelin and leptin. So ghrelin is the hormone that makes us feel hungry, and leptin is the hormone that tells us that we're full. And studies show us now that we can actually have an increase of ghrelin when we're in the stress response. And this is likely down to the fact that we're releasing our glucose. So we need to be replenishing that glucose at some point because we just released it all into our bloodstream so that we can use it. So we need to be restoring that. But also, once we leave the stress response, once we've left the sympathetic response, we move into the parasympathetic response, which is our rest and digest that I mentioned earlier. And this is when our blood flow is redirected back to things like our digestive system. And that's when we can start to feel more tired and we can start to feel more hungry because whilst we were in the stress response, our blood flow was directed to our muscles and our heart and our lungs. So then we kind of calm down and slow down and we can start to feel hungry and we can start to feel tired. And in the moment, it doesn't feel like it makes much sense because we've been working and we've been super stressed. So why am I hungry now? What's going on? Combined with the fact that we've got increased ghrelin from the stress response, we can start to feel really intense hunger that feels really misplaced. So there's all of this stuff going on, which is very biological. This isn't something you can override with willpower, but all of this is going on, as well as a whole other pathway that is worth mentioning. And this is what can happen when we have sugar cravings. So this stress response here is likely to result in us craving high sugar or high carbohydrate foods because we've released our glucose, we've got increased ghrelin. So we want to restore our glucose stores, which we do mainly through carbohydrates, but we also want quick energy, and we can withdraw energy quickly from carbohydrates. Out of all our macronutrients, carbohydrates can be the one that we can extract energy from the fastest. So it makes sense that our body is going to send us some sugar cravings. But the thing with sugar cravings is that we also have this dopamine reward system because our bodies, again, because of the way we've evolved, they like things that contain high energy because we have spent most of our existence living in famine states or feast or famine states. So it's a really beneficial mechanism that when we consume high energy foods, our body tells us to keep doing it because we can replenish our glucose stores. We can get that energy now because we might not be able to get it later because our bodies haven't quite cottoned on to the fact that supermarkets exist now. Supermarkets are a very new thing in the existence of the world, and we are still adjusting. So our body sends us a dopamine reward, and we love dopamine. That makes us feel very lit up and excited. So then we get this increased desire for high energy foods. So you can see that there's loads of stuff happening in your body that you have no control over that is resulting in you wanting to eat certain foods or craving or desiring specific foods. And that's before we even actually put you and the way that you feel into the mix as well, because that is also valid. Just the foods that you want to eat that make you feel better will also be playing into this. So there's all of these different pathways happening all at once that are culminating in why we have such an emotionally driven desire to eat or desire to soothe through food. Hopefully all of that makes sense, and you can see that actually this isn't just you being weak or you giving into your emotions or you not knowing what to do. There's all of these biological cues that are playing into the feelings that you're having, which I think is really important to be aware of when we're trying to utilize self-compassion, which is something I'm going to go into, because I'm talking about all of this stuff that we don't have control over. So what do we do? Now, if all of this is happening in my body that I can't control, what am I supposed to do? Don't panic, don't fear. There are still things that we can do to respond to these pathways in a way that feels better for us and is more beneficial. So first of all, I'm going to go through how not to respond. So if we have emotionally eaten or we feel that we've had a day that has been driven by emotional eating cues, sometimes the response can look a bit like this. So breakfast might be something like an apple or some fruit and a coffee, lunch, just a very small salad, and then dinner, I'm just going to have some chicken and some lettuce. So put a little yes in the chat box if this doesn't look that alien to you, or something similar. If something along these lines has been your response previously to a day that you feel has been a bad day of eating, or a day that you feel you've eaten too much. If you look at this and you've eaten in a way kind of similar to this before, put a little yes in the chat box so we can all see if we're at the same place. So I mean the next day, yeah. So if you, or anytime, it could be in preparation, or it could be in trying to, if noticing that you have a desire to emotionally eat, so trying to stick to this pattern instead, or if you're responding to it the next day to make up for it by eating this way. Yeah, if you look at this, yeah, we're getting a few yeses through. If you look at this and you know that there's been something similar that has been what you've tried to change your diet to. So what this results in, if we try and eat in this kind of way, is we feel deprived, we feel restricted, and you can actually feel more stressed. So even though this is a response to a stressful event that you were trying to make up for, this can actually result in us feeling more stressed, which then results in negative emotional eating. So we're kind of setting ourselves up to start the cycle again. So going back through that cycle that I talked about initially, when we eat in this type of deprived or restricted way, we can leave ourselves open to be re-triggering that cycle. So how to respond? So actually, we want our day to look like this. So a balanced meal would contain a combination of carbohydrates, fats, protein, and fiber. And we want all of our meals to look like this, regardless of how we ate yesterday, regardless of how we're eating tomorrow. All of our meals should ideally contain a combination of carbohydrates, fats, protein, and fiber. This won't happen all the time. There's going to be times that your meals aren't balanced. But when we are responding to perhaps emotional eating or stressful eating, and we feel that urge to restrict, to minimize our diet, what we want to do is be responding with as well nourished and balanced meals as we can, because the result of this is that we feel regulated, we feel nourished, and we feel energized. And that is a really important response to have when we're being quite hard on ourselves. So this involves us eating regularly and trying to connect and return to your body's internal hunger cues, because this will allow you to be able to differentiate between emotional hunger and true hunger. Being able to find tools to manage stress and manage emotions outside of food. And I am going to develop on this a little bit more, because we aren't ever taught this. We aren't ever taught how to emotionally regulate. Of all the things we learn at school, we aren't taught how to regulate ourselves, how to identify our emotions. Being able to eat more intuitively as well. So this links to being connected to our hunger and fullness cues, can be really helpful when trying to manage, overcome, or avoid emotional eating in the first place. Also, maximizing positive emotional experiences. So actively making times for the things that you enjoy when you feel this desire to respond to what you see as a negative event through restriction, because that's really punishing. When you feel yourself trying to punish yourself, maximizing things that bring you joy is a really, really helpful response, because it allows you to see that you are still worth the joy. You're still allowed the joy. Including feel-good activities like movement, relaxation, and sleep. So these are our self-care activities. So self-care often gets kind of referred to as things like a face mask and a bath, which is lovely. But actually, self-care is our basic needs, our basic fundamental requirements. So eating regularly, getting enough sleep, drinking enough water, moving our bodies, all of those things need to be prioritized. And then utilizing self-compassion, which is something I'm going to develop on a little bit more now, because I realize that this is something that people can struggle with. So people aren't often sure what self-compassion is and how to engage in it. So when we apply kind of what I've just talked about to the emotional eating cycle, so this is, hopefully you remember this from a few slides back. And again, this cycle can look different for everybody. So whether we're responding through overeating or restricting, what do we want to do in this cycle? How can we help ourselves when we feel this happening? So we've had our emotional response, and we've had our emotional event, and we feel our emotional response or emotional trigger or urge to eat. This is where we want to pause. So this is where we want to acknowledge what is happening, and we want to identify what it is we're feeling. So what is that emotional trigger that has been triggered? Is it sadness? Is it loneliness? Is it anger? Is it boredom? What is that feeling? And this requires self-awareness. So building an awareness of our own feelings and emotions is really important to be able to identify and name them. Because like I said, this isn't something we're often or ever taught. For all the words that we have for feelings and emotions, we tend to stick around the same few, like happy, sad, angry, excited. Those tend to be the main emotions or feelings that we think about when we think about feelings. And especially in the society that can happen now, is that we can often be taught to push them down, push them away, ignore the feelings, just push them down. And actually what happens is it's kind of like pushing a beach ball underwater. You can push it down and you might be able to hold it down for a while, but at some point it's going to pop up and it's quite likely hit you in the face. And that's the same thing that happens with our feelings. They're not going anywhere. If we just push them down and ignore them, they're going to come up, and then we're going to have to deal with that. So being able to use self-awareness to identify what different feelings feel like to us is really important. And this can take a bit of time. If it's not something we've ever spent any time doing, it can be quite difficult to tell the difference between, well, what is loneliness in comparison to sadness? What's the difference between when I feel angry and when I feel heartbroken, or when I feel bored versus when I feel stressed? All of these things can feel really, really different, but they feel different for lots of people. So everyone's feelings will feel different. So we have to learn our own. So once we've paused, we've identified the feeling, we then need to meet the need. And this is where our cycle starts to change. So once we've been able to name what the feeling is, we can then figure out how to appropriately respond to it based off of what we need. So this might look like journaling, talking to a friend, going for a walk, dancing in the kitchen, whatever it is that makes you feel better. But the need has to meet the feeling. For example, if I am feeling overwhelmed and I phone a friend, that might not, sounds like he wants to be a millionaire, and I phone one of my friends, that might not make me feel better. But if I'm feeling overwhelmed and I make a to-do list of all the things I need to do, that might help make me feel a little bit more in control and a little bit more like I know what I'm doing. Equally, if what I'm feeling is boredom and I try to journal about that, that might make me feel a bit more bored. Whereas if I'm feeling bored and I go for a walk and I listen to a podcast, that might make me feel better. So it's about being able to have this whole toolbox of things specific to you that make you feel better, and then being able to associate those to the different feelings that you have and knowing which one to reach for at what time. This can sound like a lot of work, but once you have built that toolbox, you never have to build it again. So once we spend a bit of time identifying what your feelings are, being able to name them and how they feel for you, then being able to figure out what responses work for those feelings, we have this whole toolbox that you can carry around with you for the rest of your life. That means you always know how to respond to what you need. And when we can do that, using self-compassion, because that's how we meet that need. So this becomes a combination of self-awareness and self-compassion, which can both feel like quite alien things if we haven't been engaging in them before. But self-compassion is necessary here because we have to be gentle enough to allow ourselves to take what it is that we need, which can be drilled out of us. We can often be taught to not do that. Don't take what you need. Don't be self-compassionate. But when we do that, it results actually in us feeling regulated on both a physical and emotional level. We feel much more powerful because we know what it is that we needed. And most importantly, we feel calm and in control around food. So instead of having a response through food and trying to soothe, we feel much more calm and much more regulated. And this is where that idea of negative emotional eating in a positive way kind of comes into things, because actually we know that there are emotions associated with food, and ice cream might make me feel better. And if actually what I want to do sometimes when I'm feeling sad is watch a film and eat some ice cream, that is absolutely fine, provided that is not the only thing I'm doing. If the only thing I turn to is food, that's not going to help me because I'm trying to fill a void. I'm trying to cover up. But actually, if I've identified that I'm feeling lonely, and what I decide to do is FaceTime a bunch of my friends and chat to them, and we all put a film on together and have some ice cream, then that's a nice little package I've made to look after myself. And then the next day I might take myself out for a walk and listen to my favorite podcast, or I might put Busted's 2003 album on and dance around the kitchen because it makes me feel better. You know, if I'm engaging in lots of different things that give me what I need, then it's absolutely okay for food to also be a part of that. And this is where trying to separate food and emotions is kind of futile, because food and feelings are attached, but this doesn't have to be a negative thing. If we change the way we look at it and we ensure that we are using a range of tools to support ourselves through emotional events, then negative emotional eating can still be a positive thing. I hope that makes sense. I'm just going to dive a little bit more into what a self-compassionate approach entails. So self-compassion means being non-judgmental towards ourselves and paying attention to our needs and what we need in that moment. And what this looks like is kind of what I was talking about a few minutes ago. So first of all, we have to name the feeling. So we need to be able to identify and feel the feeling, and then identify what that feeling needs. Think about how you can offer that to yourself with what you have available, because things won't always be the thing that you want the most in terms of responding to the feeling might not be available to you at that time, because life and things, that's how it goes sometimes. But being able to adapt and use what you have around you in order to respond is a really important part of being self-compassionate, because we have to be flexible. And it's not enough to be like, for example, something that makes me feel very happy is watching a sunrise. But if I am in a place where I can't easily get somewhere to watch the sunrise, or if the weather is really bad for multiple days in a row, if I was just like, oh, well, I can't do that, then I'm not helping myself. I'm not being self-compassionate, because I'm coming up against a barrier and then I'm just abandoning myself. Whereas I would look at, okay, well, I can't do that thing I want to do, but what else makes me feel good? Actually, can I put Busted's 2003 album on and dance around my kitchen? Yes, I can. So I'll do that instead. So it's about being able to look at what you have available to you and choose the thing that you need, and also being okay with if you perhaps select the wrong thing. If you try something and it doesn't make you feel better, being open to trying again. So then you have to give that thing to yourself and then reflect, remember, and return. So reflect on how that went. Actually, did that tool that you chose offer you what you needed? If you didn't, okay, trying something else. But if it did, remembering that and then returning to that at a later point when you have similar feelings. So hopefully all of that makes sense around how we can respond to our emotional eating with self-compassion and our stress eating with self-compassion, and at what point we need to become more aware, become more self-aware, and start to use self-compassion. So with all of that in mind, I just have a quick question of, is this you? So at the moment, do you feel like there are a lot of things that you can't let go of around your foods, whether that's calories, whether that's numbers, whether that's labels, and confused about perhaps what's best for you in terms of food or exercise? Maybe you overthink a lot of what you're doing at the moment and you feel guilty about making bad food choices, or feel guilty about when you miss a workout. Do you feel worried that you've perhaps broken your metabolism from all of the stuff that you read online? Feel low in body confidence and like you need drastic change, and feel perhaps just a little bit lost in how to achieve your health goals and stay there. If this is you, and I feel like this might be you if you're here, then I have something for you. And this is called the Feel Good Project. So this has been in my little baby in the making for a really, really long time. And it's based off of everything that we've just been talking about. So being able to identify and understand ourselves, so become more self-aware, and then know how to respond and build a toolbox of things that make us indestructible. So what is it? So the Feel Good Project is a space where you can achieve your health and fitness goals away from the influence of diet culture. So it's an anti-diet culture community that is still based around achieving health and fitness goals. And it'll essentially teach you how to build balanced meals that leave you feeling nourished, healthy, and satisfied. So when I was talking about carbohydrates, fats, proteins, fibers, building these balanced meals, actually learning how to do that. Understanding how your hormones and your period impact the decisions you make around food and exercise, things like your body image, and how to make all of that work for you. Because there were quite a few hormones that I explained in this process, and we are all just a part of our endocrine system. We're pretty much just puppets to our hormones, and they are really, really powerful in making us feel a type of way. But when we understand it, we can really use it in our favor. We can take all of that information and use it in a way that does a bunch of good for us. The Feel Good Project will also allow you to reconnect to your body's internal hunger and fullness cues. So being able to differentiate between true hunger and emotional hunger, and knowing what the different stages of hunger and fullness are to eat more intuitively. And it will allow you to be more in control of your food choices, to develop self-compassion and stop feeling guilty, and create goals aligned with your personal values, and then feel motivated and confident in how to actually put all of this into your life. So it's based around 12 weeks, and it's weekly training plans, it's fortnightly live calls, it's check-ins, it's community, it's accountability, it's habit tracking, it's everything you need in an anti-diet culture space. So there'll be no disordered responses. There's no, well, you should just, you know, try harder, have a bit more willpower. Everything is about responding with self-compassion and learning you to build a safe and strong body that you actually want to live in and that feels like home. The space that we live in, or that I live in, is here. So I mentioned informed nutrition when I was talking about the pillars of ID health. And this is where I describe the space of intuitive eating, meeting nutrition knowledge. So taking everything we know about how to eat intuitively, how to eat when we're hungry and stop when we're full, but also combine that with everything we know about optimizing nutrition and the foods that make us feel good, the foods that allow us to achieve our goals. And when we combine both of these things, we live in a space that I call informed nutrition. And that's where we want to be building you and your diet and figuring out what works for you. So some of the topics that get covered in the Feel Good Project then are, firstly, personal values, and then using those values to build goals. So they're specific to you. Intuitive eating and mindful movement. So all of the training plans are based around progressive overload, but they're all about making you feel good, making you feel strong, powerful, empowered. And it's tailored to you and what you need. Building balanced meals and how to actually portion that in a way that is right for you. Unconditional permission to eat. So what this means, why it's not terrifying, and how it can be really, really helpful for you. Mindful eating and incorporating that into our daily life, the menstrual cycle and contraception, so the impacts that these things have, and how we can use that for us, use it in a way that supports us. Breaking the binge restrict cycle, so identifying what this cycle looks like for you and then how to break it. Emotional eating, that we can, you know, dive into this even more than what I've just talked about in this webinar. Food rules, identifying them, breaking them, not having them anymore. Carbs, fats, and proteins, using nutrition knowledge and education. Self-compassion, something that's really important for us to be working on and developing. Habit stacking, so how we can create habits that are helpful for us and then stick. And then, as I've said, our hunger and fullness, so what this actually feels like and what this looks like. So I've got so the Feel Good Project doors are open for enrollment now. I opened them the other day. And it's a closed group for 12 weeks. So to ensure that the space is really safe, the group is only open for 12 weeks at a time. So there's not people coming in and out. And it starts Monday, July 4th, which is a week today. And I have for you guys a little offer for attending this webinar. So if you sign up in the next 24 hours, then you get 50% off. So the standard membership and premium membership are currently for you guys only, put down to 50% off. So you get everything for a much, much lower cost. So the difference between standard membership and premium membership, you have access to everything on both, but on premium, you also have a fortnightly check-in with me. So a full check-in that goes through all of your goals. We use a habit tracker for some accountability to make sure that you're doing well, to talk about the things that you're struggling with, to talk about how you want to develop on that further, what's going well for you, what's perhaps not. So that's the difference between the two, but I'm also just going to show you what the Feel Good Project actually looks like. So if we come onto here, where's my share screen gone? So this is what your, come on, share my screen. This is what your dashboard looks like when you log in. So when you have an account, you have this whole area, so you can have your little, that's me and my ice cream area, and you have your workout programs. There's over 200 recipes in the members area at the moment, and then a whole bunch of educational videos too. And this is where you can track your workouts. You can look into the libraries of everything. This is where you would have your check-ins. It's where you can book calls. And this is where everything is stored. But then we also have, when you actually come into the Feel Good project, this is where you can see here that this is where all of your content comes to. So you have every fortnight, there's new topics, there's new videos, there's new downloads, there's new resources. And then we also have a group call every fortnight to talk about what's going well for you. If there's anything that's happened that you're struggling with. So these are all live and these are all run by me. So you can go through whatever it is you need, whatever it is you need to talk about. We'll be diving into lots and lots of different topics to really make sure that you are helped and supported throughout that time, and be checking in on and setting your goals throughout that process. So there's a whole bunch of stuff to the Feel Good project, and it's going to be something that hopefully makes you feel really good, makes you feel really strong. That is the whole point of it. It is the Feel Good project. It is for you. So yeah, you guys who have attended today, you get to take advantage of the 50% off offer to start on Monday, and that is for the full first 12 weeks. These are some things that other people have said about the work that we do. So being able to not feel out of control anymore, be connected to your body, being kinder to yourself, being more accepting of your body and have more positive body image. The importance of food, rest, and looking after yourself, food being safe, no longer being the enemy, and creating a relationship that is more harmonious with your body, that to make it feel like your home, and build that toolbox that I've been talking about. Because once you have that toolbox, you never need to go anywhere else again. The Feel Good project has been created to be the last thing you ever need to do. You never need to go and follow another diet afterwards. You never need to go somewhere to find your answers, because you have them all. That is the whole purpose of what I want to do, is create a bunch of people who have their armor and don't need to go to anyone else to have their questions answered, because they have them all themselves. So thank you for coming and watching. If you have any questions or want to talk more about anything I've talked about today, or if you aren't sure if the Feel Good project is for you and you want to chat about it, absolutely contact me. You can email me, you can message me on Instagram, Facebook, you can check out my website. But I hope today's given you a bit more of an idea of what emotional eating can look like in lots of different ways, how you can start to manage that and start to feel much more positive about the things you're experiencing. And hopefully I will see you in the Feel Good project. So look out for me. There'll be a little email in your inbox later today, just kind of going through what it is we've talked about. I will send the recording of this webinar as well, so you can revisit it whenever you need to. But if you have any questions or anything right now, then just pop them in the chat box and I'll be more than happy to answer them. But if you've had everything you need, then thank you so much for coming, and I'll see you soon. So I will wait for a few minutes just to see if anyone has any questions or anything that they want answering. Just pop them in the chat box. But if not, just thank you so much for coming. I'll wait on a couple more minutes in case there's any questions. Obviously, if you want to send me questions privately, then like I said, feel free to do that on Instagram or Facebook, or just drop me an email. I respond to all of my emails. Thanks, Lucy. Thanks so much for coming.